Alrighty, welcome back to my channel, May Between the Pages. My name is Taylor, and today we're going to be doing my May wrap-up. I had an amazing reading month in May. I only read 4 or 5 star books. I had nothing below, which means I was right in the pocket of what I enjoy the entire month. I read a total of 8 books, which is not a lot, but it's kind of been my average for the past couple months, so I think that the way that my life is structured right now, maybe 8 to 9 books a month is going to be my average. The first book I read is a continuation of a series that I absolutely adore, and that is The Sins of the Mother, which is the 4th installment in The War Eternal by Rob J. Hayes. I actually just so happened to have the first 3 books in the special hardback editions that he just released. This is a self-pub series, so it's kind of rare to get like really nice hardback editions available. And so when Rob mentioned on Twitter he was going to be releasing these, I knew I had to get my hands on them. I'll do a full review for all 3. I think you can see the other 2 behind me here. I don't really have time to do that tonight, but the next time that I film what's the word I'm looking for? A book haul, these 3 will all be in there, but just to give you an idea, this is what the dust jacket looks like, and it has like that matte feeling that a lot of black covers usually have. And then if you open it, it's printed. The art is printed on the book itself and has a quote on the back, which this one says, "No one escapes the pit." They are stunning. I am so happy to have these as part of my collection because I love this series from the bottom of my heart. And so the 4th book, Sins of the Mother, was released last month, and I reached out to grab an ARC even before it was released. I was like, I need this in my life. And I was actually lucky enough to receive an ARC before it was even released. So yeah, I'm very hyped for this series. I just love it. And so we follow Escara, or Eska, who you see on this cover here. And this book is told in the narrative style where you are listening to an older person talk about their life. So, you know, some people really like that style, some people aren't a fan of it. It does lend itself to a very specific narrative voice. So Eska is not a good person. She's very haughty, she's very full of herself, but she's also aware that she's that way. So it lends to a really interesting narrative voice when you read these books. Basically, in this first book, we follow her as she is a very young girl who has been trained, basically brainwashed, to be a soldier for her nation in the war that's taking place at the time. And she's a very powerful sorcerer, so she is a great asset to this nation. So they basically brainwash her and train her to be a weapon for them. And then she goes to war, but they lose the battle, the final battle, and she ends up being captured by the opposing nation and put in the worst prison that they have, which is called the Pit. And it is buried miles and miles and miles below ground where no light ever enters. So in this first book, Along the Razor's Edge, we follow her as she navigates living in the pit. And it is a very grim, dark, harsh world, but Eska matches that world very well. Like I said, she's not a good person, and Rob J. Hayes doesn't try to moralize that. She has people that she cares about, and she has like her own moral code, but she's objectively not good. And that is something that I just love about her. It's never explained away or made into a softer thing. It just is what it is. And I just adore this series. I adore her and her journey, and the 4th book was no different. I don't want to give away any plot points, which makes it almost impossible for me to talk about the 4th book at this point in the series. So just know that I gave it 5 stars. It had that amazing, sassy narrative voice that I just adore. And it gave me lots of plots, twists, and turns, and everything that I've come to expect from this series. And I do believe there's going to be 5 books in total. So I think there's 1 more to go, but I cannot wait to read that one in the future. The next book I read is also a continuation of a series, and that is In the Labyrinth of Drakes. This is the 4th book in the Lady Trent series, which you have probably heard me mention in my last couple wrap-ups, the last couple months, because I've been part of a read-along run by Maria over on T-Books Magic and a couple other booktubers, where we read one of the books in the series every month. And I have found a new all-time favorite in this series, because every book so far has been 5 stars, and that's a lot rarer harder than people might realize to have an entire series be 5 stars, but that's what this is shaping up to be. So this 4th book really took all of the themes and all the things I've mentioned in previous wrap-ups and really ramped them up to the next level. And we also finally get the romance that I have been wanting coming to fruition. Now, romance is not a main plot point in the series, so if that's something that you're gonna go into this looking for, don't. But there is a small subplot that comes to fruition in this book that I was just so excited to finally see. This installment also takes place in the desert, and I get like very Indiana Jones uncovering like ancient societies all mixed up with the dragon study that we get from the other books, and it is delightful. It is so fun to read. The sassiness of Lady Trent in her narration was there, as we've come to expect as well. And I don't know, I can't say more without giving anything away, kind of like Sins of the Mother, but it is another 5-star installment in a series that I adore. This next book I read was the only good book club pick for this month, and that was The Island of Sea Women. And I ended up giving this book 4 stars, but I haven't been able to get it out of my head since I read it, so I may end up having to bump this up to a 4.5 at least, because it's been living in here rent-free, honestly. This book follows a dual timeline perspective, but with the same main character. So we have one timeline that's in the present where our main character is an old woman, and then we have flashbacks to the past when she's young and when she's growing up. This story takes place on the island of Jeju, which is a small island in Korea. And it's known for its culture of haenya, which are women divers who dive into the sea without any scuba diving equipment, anything at all. They dive down into the depths and come back up with seafood to sell at market and to support their families. And it's a very proud and very old culture. The story starts in the current time with our main character Young Suk as she's on the beach and is approached by a modern foreign family, looks like maybe mixed with Korean possibly, and they ask her, "Do you know our grandmother? Because we're looking for people who knew her before she moved to the States." And Young Suk shuts down this interaction immediately and says, "No, I don't know anything about it, don't talk to me." And from there we start getting the flashbacks. The flashbacks start from when she's a child, when she's a baby diver, learning how to be a haenya, and it continues through the Japanese occupation of Korea, all the horrors that came with that, and the war that shortly followed. And one thing I will say is that this book, the blurb of this book doesn't advertise just how like violent and dark it gets at a certain point. So I will say, without trying to spoil anything for the book for those who haven't read it, there is a scene where we are witness to a massacre. And it's very up close and personal. And very suddenly violent, whereas the rest of the book doesn't really have this vibe to it. So I do think this was, you know, on purpose by the narrator to show you the shocking nature of this. And I do think it's an important thing to talk about because this particular massacre was hushed up and covered by the government for years and years and years and years. And finally, recently, people have been able to talk about it free of consequence. So I think it's a very important thing to talk about, but the blurb doesn't mention it at all. So I just want to let those know going into this book that there are some very graphic scenes. The violence is not gratuitous, though. It definitely serves a purpose, and it leaves a lasting mark on all of our characters. And I would say that this book, while it does talk about the culture of Jeju and the haenya, it really delves into the characters. It's more of a character study, and how PTSD, loss, grief, love, how all of these things can shape us into who we are. And I think it was a beautiful exploration of that. However, there were a couple points where I felt my attention kind of dipping, and not being told, you know, about this scene coming into it did kind of, you know, not ruin, but it had a large effect on my enjoyment reading the book because it wasn't what it was advertised as per se. But I ended up giving this book 4 stars because I think it's important, and I think the character work is really, really well done, and I would definitely recommend it to other people. The next 3 books that I read were the first 3 installments in the Murderbot series. So the first one being All Systems Red, the second one being Artificial Condition, and the third one Rogue Protocol. I think there are 6, maybe 7 at this point in this series. And this is a series I've been wanting to pick up and read for a really, really long time, but I just have never bumped it to the top of my priority list. And then one day I needed an audiobook for my commute to work, because I usually listen to audiobooks when I ride my bike to work. And reading, physically is clearly not an option. And none of the books that were on my TBR were available via audiobook. So I just went through Scribd and looked at the titles that I'd saved in the past, and All Systems Red caught my eye, and it's a novella. So I thought, oh, okay, so if I listen to this on 2 times speed as I usually do, this is like an hour and a half. So about my commute, a little more than that, and I can probably read about 1 a day. So I decided to do that. And I really enjoyed these. Basically, in the series, we follow an AI who has become sentient, but he's hidden this fact from his company who owns him and from the humans around him. And basically his function as an AI is to be lent out to humans who need him for protection or to make sure that they don't die on missions. So he's programmed to fight, even though he's not a military bot, he's programmed to fight and protect those who he's in the service of. So he's become sentient, and basically we follow him as he complains about the humans he has been assigned to. He is sassy, he's antisocial, and he just doesn't really want to be there. He just wants to spend his time watching shitty TV shows. And his narrative voice, I think I've said that a lot in this wrap-up. I guess I have a lot of books that kind of come from this perspective, but his narrative voice is fantastic. I was giggling out loud the whole time that I was listening to this book while riding my bicycle. I probably looked insane to the people I was passing, because I'm just like, hee hee, like giggling as I ride past them. But this was a great, great choice. There is a plot that continues through each book, so I don't really want to say too much about it, as they are novellas, and basically anything gives away a main point of the plot. But essentially, Murderbot has an event in his past that apparently was his fault, where it resulted in the death of a lot of humans. But his mind is supposed to have been wiped free of this memory, but it hasn't quite completely gone away. So just take that as the starting point for the plot, and it goes from there. One thing I really enjoyed about the first book, All Systems Red, but which continues throughout the books that I've read so far in the series, is the theme of discussing capitalism and how basically we're all fucked. And I really just enjoyed the way that they wrestle with this idea of capitalism and how companies can own people, entities, how you may think a company cares about you, but they have no reason to do so. There's a lot of discussion of that type of thing through Murderbot's thoughts. So, wonderful series. Loved it so far. I gave the first 2 4 stars, and the third one, Rogue Protocol, I bumped up to 5 stars. So I'm excited to see where this goes from here on out. Like I said, I think there are 6 or 7 books, and I was consuming 1 a day for a while there, and then I ended up reading some other books I had to get done by the end of the month. But I do plan to continue with this series. Maybe you'll see them again this coming month in June if I need, a filler between all the physical books I'm going to be reading. So I would definitely like to own these one day. They made me smile. They're really expensive because Tor.com novellas, I don't know why they think they can be that expensive. Probably because people buy them anyway, people being me, because I do think I'm going to purchase these eventually. But yeah, I really enjoyed them, and I get the hype for them now. The next book I read is one that I've been trying to pick up for a really long time, and that is A Drowned Kingdom by P.L. Stuart. This is a self-pub book that P.L., the author, so kindly sent my way, and I've been meaning to get to it for a couple months, and I've now gotten to it. And clearly, if you look at all the tabs, I had thoughts. Mostly very good thoughts. This book follows the second son of the leader of Atlantis, the place that is seen as Atlantis in the story, and he is the least favored son, so he's not going to be getting the crown anytime soon. In the beginning of this book, we follow him as he talks about his pride, his joy, in his country and his people. But then there are some familial divides and rifts that start causing really big political schisms between him and his family. And so there's a lot of like political unrest in the beginning of this book, but it's not really a spoiler to say, as it's very clear in the synopsis, that after we get to know this man, our main character, Othrun, and his culture and where he's coming from, a cataclysm happens and Atlantis is, buried beneath the waves. And after that, our main story really takes off, where Othrun has to carve out a place for his people, those of his people who are left, in a new and uninviting and completely unknown world. Othrun is misogynistic, sexist, racist, all of the ists, all of the isms that you can imagine. That is him. And it's very blatant that he is this way because you follow the book from his perspective. So there are some sections of this book where you're like, oh my God, why did I have to read those words with my eyes? But that's the point. Like, you're supposed to recognize how horrendous this worldview is. But there are people that hold it, and I think it's important to be able to see from that perspective every once in a while. So we start with him in his head after this whole cataclysm has happened, and he's trying to find a place for his people. And so he ends up coming to another nation that he hopes to conquer, essentially. But of course, things never go according to plan. And so when he arrives at this nation, he's got these grand plans of, I'm just gonna, march forward and take over this place, but conquering does not happen in the snap of a finger. You can't Thanos snap, that into existence. He has to contend with different cultures, different kings, different political structures, and also there is a very clear indication that gods have a real world presence in this world. They are among us. They can influence humans' lives, and I love that. You guys know I love meddling gods, and it seems like that's going to be all over these pages, and I cannot wait for book 2 because I think it seems like we're going to get a lot more of that, and I'm so excited for it. So not only does Othrun have to deal with a bunch of different nations, he has to deal with a bunch of different gods who have power in this realm where his god does not. And it's very, very intriguing. The writing is definitely slower paced and very character-based, which I don't mind because I'm a character-based reader. There are some battles here, and they are fantastically written, I will definitely say that. Very easy to visualize and very intense. So the battle scenes were well done, but they are few and far between in this first installment. But I do know that PL plans to have a lot more action-based plots later on in the series, so I do think this is a really good start to an epic fantasy series. We really get to know our characters, we really get to know the world, and the writing is very, what's the word I'm looking for? There's a lot of SAT words in here, in a good way, is what I'm trying to say. Like, it's not super easy breezy writing, but it's not purple prose either. You definitely won't have the issue of the same adjective being used twice to describe something. And that's something I really enjoyed about this, was having really rich and expansive language used to describe this world. I felt really immersed in it when I was reading. Overall, like I said, this is a great start to an epic fantasy series. I definitely plan to continue forward, and I'm excited to see the character journey that Othrun goes on, because I don't think he's going to become a teddy bear or anything like that, because he needs to be hard and harsh for the world that he's in and the role that he has in the continuation of his people. But I'm very interested to see how his inner monologue and his perspective changes throughout this series. And the last book that I read for May, although technically I finished it in the very beginning of June, but I finished it before filming this video, and that's what really matters, and that is Daughter of the Moon Goddess by Lynn. This was a 5-star prediction for me, and oh baby did it come through. This is definitely 5 stars. I loved this book. This story is based off of a Chinese folktale about the moon goddess, but in this book we follow the daughter of that moon goddess, as you can tell by the title. Xingyan, who is the daughter, has been kept secret by her mother for all of these years. in order to hide her from the wrath of the celestial emperor. I won't tell you why that's the case, because that's part of the story. But one day, basically, Xingyin has to run away from her home, where she has been protected and led a very peaceful, happy life with her mother and one other woman. And she's suddenly thrust into the world of the celestial kingdom, where all of the other immortals live. And she has no connections and no idea what to do. And it's about her forging her path and making her way through this world. And it is so good. Xingyin is such a strong, resilient, inspiring character, and not in the way where you're like, oh, come on, no one acts like that. Like, no, she is so believable, so relatable, and I found her so inspirational through so many different points in this story. It's also a breath of fresh air the way that she thinks, because a lot of young YA protagonists make crappy choices, and you're like, okay, well, they're a YA protagonist, like you can expect them to do this, but she specifically decides not to do those things. Like, she may have the instinct to act a certain way, and then sits down and thinks about it for a second and says, no, that's not in my best interest. And as a reader, you're like, finally, thank God, some self-reflection from a character like this. So that was just so refreshing. Something else that people mention is that this book has a love triangle, but that it's done really, really well. And I completely agree with that. Even if you're someone who doesn't like love triangles as a rule, I think that the way that this one was handled was not what you would imagine. I was a really big fan of how that plot point was carried through. Now, granted, I don't hate love triangles as much as other people do, so maybe I'm giving it a bit more grace than others would, but I do think that even if that's a trope you usually don't like, the way it's handled here might work for you. I also have a really soft spot for archery. I used to do it when I was younger, and I don't know, it's always held a special place in my heart, and that is the chosen weapon of Xingyin. So that also has me just in love with her as a character. This is one of those rare occurrences where I went for the special edition before having read the book, and I was kind of nervous that I would end up regretting that. Don't regret it, not even a little bit, and I will be purchasing all of the editions that match this in the future, because I need to have this gorgeous collection on my bookshelf because I'm obsessed. I need to know what happens next. This book also gave me those binge feelings that I haven't had in a really long time, where when I had to go to work, when I had to study, when I had to do something besides reading, it bothered me and I was dying to sit down and read this book. And that is something that I haven't had in quite some time. Even though I enjoyed all of the books that I read this month, that is a very specific feeling that I think a bunch of other readers can sympathize with, that I need to read this now, binge-worthy feeling. And this book gave me that. I could not put it down. If you can't tell, this book was 5 stars. I adore it, and I can see myself rereading this in the near future. That concludes my May wrap-up. I had an amazing reading month, as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, and I just hope that this pattern continues into the next couple months, because all 4 or 5 stars, I mean, what more can a reader ask for? Let me know in the comments down below if you've read any of these books, if you have the same feelings as I do, if you feel differently. I love to discuss and chat in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and click that bell. I'd love to have you as part of this community, and I appreciate it. But for now, I'm gonna head out. Jane!